G'day everyone, this is Ainke here. Welcome to Investor Journeys, where we chat with everyday Aussies and seasoned investors about their property journeys, the wins, the stuff ups and everything in between. Whether they've got one property or a whole portfolio, we dive into how they did it, what they've learned and what their journey's been like so far. No fluff, just real stories from real people. So let's get stuck in. G'day everyone, welcome to the IJ podcast. And I've got a very special guest today. I talk a lot about people coming from New Zealand and trying to find some people from Australia, but this one, you can't get much closer to where I grew up with this guest. Really excited to have this guest on. Welcome, Hayden. Really glad to have you on today, mate. And really appreciate your time and we'll get stuck into your story.
Sounds good. Great.
So Hayden, do you want to just give the listeners a bit about your background and where you come from?
Yeah, sure. Clearly a Kiwi. Grew up on the Kapiti Coast in New Zealand. Have been in Melbourne for about 14 years now, and working the job, getting back to New Zealand when I can. Doing life.
When did you move over to Australia?
It's a great question. About 2010.
Yeah, same time as me, really. Yeah, so we grew up very close to each other. I grew up in Palmerston North, and it all probably rings a bell for you.
Yeah, I think it's going without hard work.
That's right. Yeah, and Palmy boys, shout out. And so you've moved over in 2010. And before we get into your Australian story, do you want to tell us a bit about your upbringing and what your money story is? And so did you guys ever talk about money? Like how many siblings did you have? And do you guys ever talk about that kind of thing at home?
Yeah, great question. So my family are hard workers, and you take that ship off the parent block. My brother and I learned a lot through kind of family business and also through upbringing, both before boys high and also boys high. We didn't talk a lot, I guess, as a family around investments and what have you, but it didn't take long as soon as particularly my brother and I hopped into kind of the professional life to work out that you need something on the side. And so as to set yourselves up later on. It's a fundamental theme. A lot of property investors don't get things handed to them, and investors in general. And we find that it's come from a culture at home and hardworking generation. Yeah, completely understand. So it's just you and your brother? Yeah, just a brother and I.
Yeah. Did he follow a very sort of similar route to you in terms of investment, or?
He's on the journey. Without taking this podcast off rails, I always wanted to become a pilot. He's literally recently flown off my dreams. So he's on a different kind of avenue, but he's very much wired the same way.
Yeah, interesting. Cool. So you've grown up in the Kapiti Coast there and you've moved over to Australia, of course, and you moved over to Melbourne.
Yeah.
Now, you moved in 2010. Was it just a general, like a Kiwi coming over with a job that no investments under your belt at that time?
Yeah, correct. My now wife and I thought we'd come over for a year or two. Just finished up at PwC. There was a different challenge, different environment, a little bit going on in Melbourne. So yeah, we'd come over for a year, maybe two. It seems to have just been on auto extend.
Yeah, I think that's a common theme for a lot of the Kiwis I know over here. Come over a couple of years and then things start looking pretty rosy with respect to the salaries and just the lifestyle. Yeah, and you've enjoyed Melbourne, obviously, when your lovely wife, Hayley, couldn't quite join us today. It's been a pivotal part of this journey. You guys just decided to stay here because of the lifestyle?
I think it was a few factors. So one is the career opportunities. So there's obviously a little bit more in Melbourne than maybe different pockets in New Zealand. And then over time, you start to build your support network and family and friends. And the longer that goes on, the more kind of roots you lay down. And with all the money.
Yeah. So you came over here, you started renting in Melbourne. Correct me if I'm wrong, but did you have an investment in Wellington at all?
I did for a couple of years. So I went in halves with a friend. This is going back to when I was 18, maybe 17, 18. So back when property prices were relatively a whole lot lower. And so long story cut short, I sold like a boy racer car and decided to grab a house with a mate and do it up. We did that for a few years and then, sold it off. But I've definitely had the itch ever since. And then when I came across to Melbourne, adopted the silly philosophy that the market would correct and I was just buying my time, which obviously never eventuated. So paid the price, just on the fence.
Oh, look, it really depends what state you're in. If you're in, say, Perth, you probably would have been fine. But if you're in Melbourne, yes, it really took off around 2013, 2014, which is a lot of our friends came over that time and were chasing the market at the same time too. Yeah, completely understand. So what really got you, you've had some experience in buying property over in New Zealand and you've sold that off. And what got you thinking about property over here, were you thinking about your own place? Is that what you're thinking at the start? Or when did property investment come into your space?
Yeah, I think firstly, there's a little bit of regret with selling the one in Wellington, particularly as the prices went through the roof. So there's an opportunity cost there. But I think it became very clearly apparent. And I think one of our first conversations was at Christmas one year. And we were talking about the balance between working hard and saving and kind of where that got you versus having vehicles off to the side. And I think it was a realization that some of the roles that we take on our lives are not sustainable, but looking to maximize that and leverage it to build a vehicle.
Yeah.
So I want a little bit of regret for kind of selling off early in Wellington, but then to work out how to get the vehicle going again, acknowledging that life isn't just about working really hard and struggling to confront.
Yeah. Just out of interest in that Wellington property, what did you buy for? Like, was it quite cheap back then?
Yeah, great question. I think we bought for about 300K.
Oh, yeah.
And I think we sold for, I think we sold for about 400, which essentially covered our renovation costs.
Yes. I was just thinking 300K is a lot for a 17 or 18-year-old, but then I suppose you did go half. So yeah, I can understand that. It's that sort of intention. Look, you don't know what you don't know, and you've obviously learned from that, and we'll talk about your journeys. So then you're with your wife, Hayley, and when did you buy your own place? Is that what the thinking was at the time?
Yeah, so we bought our own place about 3 years ago, so 2021, 22, COVID kind of era. And yeah, we knew that we had bought for that stage of our lives, so before we had our daughter and so forth, and also acknowledged that at some point later on down the track, we'd like to upgrade that, and then looking at how we funded that. And the only avenue at that time was to continue down the employment path, which, as mentioned before, was everyone's employment is different, but ours at the time carried a fair bit of kind of like stress, and we acknowledged that there wasn't unlimited sustainability there. So
yeah,
started to think about how we, not only for ourselves, were able to set the platform to get ahead, but also how do we set our family up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're thinking about your daughter and your kids and what you're going to do. So that's understandable. So you bought your place. I didn't actually realize it was that recent. So only 3 years ago. Geez, you've done well, especially if we talk about your whole portfolio now, but we'll get into that. So you bought your own place, you settled in. What got you thinking about property investment?
I think one, I had done it before, and so like sort of scratch that itch. And then two, we had some friends that had jumped on the bandwagon and were doing quite well out of it. And I think also acknowledging that my philosophy of waiting for the market to cool or reverse was not transpiring to reality. And at some point, acknowledging that we just had to bite the bullet. But I think also, I mentioned before, the kind of job, the stress and what have you, acknowledging that wasn't, not holding it forever, how to leverage that for the time being and make it work for us. And so I think acknowledging that maybe we don't want to hold those roles forever and trying to make the most of the situation.
Yeah. Was Hayley on board with all the sort of decisions that you guys were making? Were you guys quite in unison there?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes.
You might need to be here.
I don't know. No, great question. And I think at different times we've leant in slightly different directions, which has helped our collective decision making. But I think ultimately she's the decision maker.
Yeah, it's very common for couples not to be quite in the right frame of mind. Everyone comes from different backgrounds. That's just very natural.
I think though it's helped our collective decision making though, right? Because we have different perspectives with different angles and different kind of risk tolerances, etc. And I think ultimately it's yielded a much better result.
Yeah, absolutely. I know so many, including myself, who you've got your go-getter and then you've got someone who needs to just say, oh, I'll just think about it. I think that's what not only helps in property investment, helps in life. So yeah, that completely understand. Okay, so you bought your 22, you think you're getting into property investment. What's next? How do you action your next step?
I think one thing we realized when we purchased our own property is that we brought up in the Melbourne market. And so we actually use a buyer's agent at the time to try and find a good suburb and to think about the right things that we either A, didn't know about or B, didn't have time to research. And I think for me, that was quite an interesting learning. We've all got our particular kind of muscles and specialties. And for me, it's acknowledging what you don't know. And we knew that we wanted to get into property as an investment vehicle. We didn't know where, we didn't know when, we didn't know what conditions, etc. We also didn't know how to scale it. And so whilst I might work with numbers, between you and I work with different numbers. You obviously work on the property numbers. And so acknowledging we had to bring someone that has their finger on the pulse and does this day in, day out. for us was a smart decision. And we obviously then got connected, A, because that's your specialty, but B, because we had our time focused on other things, right? Like career and Willow and Josh and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we got talking probably late 23. One thing I know about you guys is once you hit the go button, you guys go, which is absolutely what you need in property investment. We got speaking in terms of, the cash flow and the capital growth and what we're really after. You've just bought your place in 2022 and what's the strategy moving forward? And we lent on making sure that we've got good growth because that's what you need at the start of your portfolio, making sure that you've got the cash flow to support that. Fortunately, you've come at a time when there were markets back then in late 23 where we could get into both good cash flow and good growth locations. These days, it's not that easy because a lot of the affordable markets have now jumped up. So you guys have hit the go button, so to speak, at the right time. And do you want to tell us about that first property?
Yeah, I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think the time in between us hitting the go button and securing it, contractually got securing it, was like literally a couple of weeks. And I think a testament to how quickly you move. But I think for us, we're really surprised with A, how quickly like you sourced it, but B, when we started to look at the numbers, and I can remember you and I were talking about whether it was capital growth or cash flow, we were amazed how it essentially ticked both boxes. So obviously not at the time, we didn't understand the capital growth, but pretty low pricing compared to say the likes of Melbourne, and was able to essentially watch its face, which for us was a big step in the right direction. And I'm sure we'll talk about this in a second, but when the capital growth then came, it was a no-brainer and set us up with exciting things thereafter.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's important to go quick because at the end of the day, the market, especially that market, we'll talk about the location, but that market was going fast. In a month, that price we got wouldn't be what it was if we left another month. So depending on the market, it really depends. You really need to act quickly. And we had obviously relationships and we'd been investing in that area for a while. Yeah. So do you want to tell a bit about the numbers and the location?
Yeah. So I think we bought just under 400K in Medina. And I think about a year and a bit later, it's lifted to about 540. Massive capital growth in a very short period of time. And as I mentioned before, the cash flow essentially takes care of itself, which has been great. And if anything, just a little bit of reflection of what might have happened if we did pull the trigger a little bit sooner. But it's been an absolute success story for us. And yeah, we're very proud of partnering with you and setting that vehicle off.
Yeah, that's amazing results. The area, I mentioned to you about the area, and I'd actually bought in that same suburb 1 year ago as well. That area had a reputation and it was going through, in my opinion, some gentrification. And with that budget, we got to make sure that we make our clients and our buyers understand some of the demographics and some of the, I suppose, the risk, but the balancing out with the affordability in that space with tenants and so on. But the fact that this property was on a large block and also it had a separate dwelling at the back. It's a granny flat. It can't be rented out separately, but it's essentially a separate space as well. I thought that was a fantastic X factor for this kind of property as well.
Yeah, and it also offered, the one thing that I brought forward from the Wellington kind of investment is the passion to roll the sleeves up. You and I discussed where on that spectrum I could lean in to add value, and it was nice to be able to hop over and throw a bit of paint on the walls and erect a wall that kind of took it from a 3-bedroom to a 4-bedroom fairly quickly.
Yeah, I was just about to mention that. You went over after seven and rolled the sleeves up, mate. I couldn't do that. I'm Sri Lankan, so most of us can't do much of that. But you did well to get over there and make the most of it. And yeah, correct me. So you just reminded me about that extra room. So it was originally a dining room, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was like a lounge/dining, just a weird layout.
Yeah, but we created an extra wall and essentially made it into another bedroom. And I think that was another X factor for that type of property, which just added so much value in that space.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. So that's now rented out at a really good clip, and the rental demand just keeps on growing over in Perth at the moment. The population growth and the lack of supplies is really drumming into the rents over there. So I think you'll continue to do well on that front. And obviously you've got the growth on that one as well. It's a great start to your journey, and you pulled the trigger and we started speaking only a few months later?
Yeah, it would have been 4 or 5 months after that. Yep.
Yeah, we started speaking again and we were saying, I was like, mate, it's already gone up $100,000. What's going on here? And even I didn't predict such a rapid growth in that space, but it did. And I think we bought well as well. A shout out to the agent, Coulson. I know Trent quite well and he got us a good figure as well. We bought well in and we've got equity to use essentially with your incomes as well. So we said, look, there is another area that I would recommend to get in while you can. And so we hit the go button again.
We did. Yeah.
Pretty quickly. And so do you want to tell us your second purchase?
Yeah. So I think just before we maybe dispose purchases up, for us, when we sat back and realized the capital growth and also the fact that it washed its face or paid for itself, for us, lifting the phone to you was a no-brainer, right? Because the risk profile was essentially zero. We didn't have to strum up really any additional savings or equity because the first investment covered that. Yeah, picked up the phone to you. You'd mentioned a place called Townsville. We'd heard of before or about, and then almost hit repeat, right? We bought it for just under 400K. Again, hopped on the plane, went up and rolled the sleeves up and did some work. And then, yeah, like near on a year later, about the same kind of uplift. So like another 140K in capital, and Queensland insurance aside, essentially washes his face, which we knew about going in. But again, like a very kind of like quick process from discussion to closure. Landed some tenants and have at that point added a second vehicle to our retirement scheme.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This property was an older property. It's a Queenslander. And we got so that the location is an extremely affluent location, but based on the budget, we got into a space which had somewhat different demographics and compared to some of the other areas in that particular suburb. But my reasoning was that once the higher end of that suburb just keeps on growing, the other part of that suburb, it's still within the same postcode, it's going to go up and it's not going to be left behind. And we wanted to make sure that you were informed, but also given the budget and the cash flow, we thought this would be a really good opportunity to get in. And this is, like you said, your second investment. You've got your first one that's doing extremely well. So we wanted to push hard on this one. So yeah, I think it's a great property. I think it's a great location. You've obviously got over $100,000 in equity in a year or so, which is amazing. And this particular property, I recall there was 2 separate living areas, and I questioned whether one of those areas can be split off to another room. Now, I think the advice you got at the time was perhaps not, but it's something maybe we can revisit in the future.
Yeah, 100%. I think we made a decision because the inside was in pretty good spec and still is in good spec, that we would leave the interior, particularly because it's a Queenslander as well. There was some living space below and what have you. Space wasn't an issue on the inside, and for that particular one, we decided to focus on the outside.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got that. Now, the tenants there probably hasn't been as great as the ones in Perth, and that's obviously something that you've had to deal with. But at the end of the day, as long as we can manage that side of things, the tenants can change, the property can't, and at the end of the day, the location can't.
Yes.
So long term and with the rental that you're getting. And I recall you were getting circa 500 a week from day one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And on a 390, 400K purchase, which is fantastic. That's extremely good on a property like that. So anything else on that property?
No, you're right. Some things can't change. But one thing we did change is our property manager, and our current property manager is fantastic and has essentially made us feel a whole lot better about the tenancy kind of arrangement and what have you. Shout out to Nick.
Yeah, absolutely. No, Nikki is amazing. And yeah, we can always change property manager if need be. And I have no issues with Nikki. So shout out to Nikki as well. No doubt she's listening to this. You've got now 2 under your belt. Most people would be thinking, okay, you've done 2 in 6 months. Within 6 months, you're probably going to put your heels back for a little while. But lo and behold, you cut to me again in a few months and you're talking about a third within a year.
I'm trying to figure out if I came to you or you came to us, but either way, we came to each other. And I think, again, like we've had a really good start over in Perth, doubled down on that in Townsville. And then I guess we came to a junction point, which is working out whether we took that capital uplift and indeed graded our personal property, or whether we wanted to play the long game and stay in a slightly smaller kind of property with some things that maybe we don't like, and to try and double down on the vehicle and short-term paying for long-term gain. And we ultimately decided to do that. And I think it was really good conversing with you, acknowledging that we had 2 kind of properties that were straight out of the gates and have performed really well, but maybe we wanted to diversify the portfolio a little bit and sure you talked about it in a second, but it made sense for us to lean into that. And again, through the capital uplift in Townsville, we were able to pull the trigger without necessarily having to scrape savings from our own kind of personal sense and what have you. Pretty fortunate, but yeah, we've decided to go again with you.
Yeah, I think that's a good point about the saving side of things. Do you know roughly after the first purchase, how much saving out of your own savings you've had to put into the purchases at all?
So,
in the subsequent two?
Yeah, I don't think we've really had to put $1 in because the capital uplift from day one has enabled us to fund the transaction costs, a little bit of kind of uplift and everything to the following purchases without divulging too much. We're not fantastic savers. And so what I guess the sequence of these activities have enabled us to do is to build equity and to build an asset portfolio that essentially is self-sufficient.
Yeah, look, I wouldn't be too hard. You've got a child, you've just bought your own place, so you've bought 2 properties, completely get it in terms of saving. But I think that's an amazing point. And that's why I love property. If you can buy well at the start and get into areas which have short-term growth type fundamentals, obviously you're getting into a hot market, but you're able to extract that growth pretty quick or equity out pretty quick and go again. And yeah, the fact that you haven't used your savings and you've just acquired 2 more properties by signing some paper is just, yeah, it's amazing. And that's, yeah, again, why I love property. That's why the wealth keeps going, getting richer. There's certain rules, if you play by the game, really benefits people who make that sort of action. Yeah, and to talk about your strategy, you've got into 2 locations, in my opinion, that have pretty much been on a very quick path to growth. Obviously, you can tell you've got 150K in less than a year or a year on each property. That's not going to go on forever. It's not rainbows all the time in property, and it goes through cycles. And what I suggested was, look, we can obviously get into another market like that, but the last thing I want my buyers to have is a property portfolio that's stagnant. And whilst I can't control the cycles, I have a high level understanding based on the data and the fundamentals and each market cycle on their own, where it's positioned, what it will do over time. And look, Perth, I always knew that it's going to get to a point where it'll just get too high and it'll start to stabilize. Townsville's fairly similar. And I wanted to suggest a metro city again for you guys with the stability that's probably under the market cycles at the moment, that has the mid to long term play here, because this was going to be quite unquote your final purchase for maybe for a little while. And so we suggested Melbourne, and there's many reasons why we suggested Melbourne, but we thought that would be the best option for you guys to add to your portfolio at the time. And I didn't make it clear you're not going to see the growth that you have been in these other 2, but that's designed on purpose to make sure your portfolio's not just diversified, but fluctuate in the right direction if you put a linear line through all the ups and downs. Yeah, so we've talked about Melbourne, and you guys are on board, and we've got a 3rd property within a year. Not many people do that, especially starting from scratch, and especially people who have just bought their principal place of residence as well. I can say there's a very low minority there who can achieve that. And you guys have a testament again to your drive and your decision-making to be able to get into the markets while you can. Because what I would say, fast forwarding, is that suburb that we bought in Melbourne for you, we can actually start to see some data rising in terms of sales activity. So I think we've got there in the right time. Yeah. So do you want to tell us a bit about that 3rd property?
Yeah. Before I do, so I don't think part of it is drive. Part of it's also having the right people on the team. Yeah. And I think the fact that we come back to you 3 times in a year, A, is results driven, but B, there's clearly deep trust there. And we might be the one pulling the trigger per se, but you're the one advising us where to point. The results speak for themselves. Where was it? We selected a place called Melton, which turns out to be about 20 minutes from our place, which is great because I can go there often and cut trees and roll the sleeves up. And I've done that a fair bit. But yeah, nice little corner block, some nice area out the back, good long-standing tenant, which we liked. Probably has our opportunity to do up on the inside later on, but we really appreciate having stability with the investments and both the price that kind of we secured it at with some of the metrics that you spoke to, overlaid with the fact that we a long-standing tenant, like the property and so forth. Yeah, made it a great kind of decision.
Yeah, absolutely. She's a great tenant and she's been there for a while. And I do believe the rent is a little bit under what it should be. But at the end of the day, if you're securing a tenant like that, because I think the lease renewed and you put it at a point where it wasn't up to the market, it may be or could be. Yeah, the fact that you've got a stable tenant there who's been there a while and looking after the place. It shouts for volumes. And I'm sure that's not sometimes an easy decision for people because the cash flow in Melbourne generally is quite low. The yields are lower than most other cities purely because it's Melbourne. There's other investment properties out there. And also the costs involved with holding the property generally is lower in Melbourne based on the lower insurances and the property manager fees, et cetera, et cetera. And you're not subject to natural sort of disasters or weather events, such as the insurance you mentioned in Townsville, which you've got to account for. So that's why, rents are generally a bit higher there, but you've got a stable tenant and look, the market will do what it's doing and you've got stability there. So I think that was a great purchase at under 500.
Yes. Yeah, correct.
Yeah, I remember putting that to you and I said, guys, I reckon I can get under 500 for you because we were talking a little bit higher from memory and we managed to get that. Do you remember the numbers on that one?
Was it 497?
It was 480. I'm sure it was about 480. We'll come back to it, but I'm pretty sure it was around the 480 mark. So yeah, it was your other purchases were in the 90s. We got this one down to the 480 mark or just over. And yeah, it's like I said, a corner block. It's in an area which is very close to the station and it's a very stable area, that one. And that's a long-term play. We'll continue to enjoy the fruits of that labor as we go on in time. So you've got 3 properties under your belt, excluding your PPR. What's it valued at the moment?
So the total, we're going to debt profile about 1.4 underneath that. So a good couple of 100K in there. But I think the thing doesn't represent is, whilst there is a difference between obviously the valuation and the debt, it's enabled us to fund, as I say, the transaction costs, stamp duties, et cetera, et cetera. That's a snapshot today, but more importantly, it's enabled us to set up 3 vehicles, which over time that gap should continue to diverge. And that's, I think, hopefully will become like a force multiplier rather than us pressing the pause button after the first kind of amazing purchase or even the second.
Absolutely.
I think like that's the exciting thing, right? Like life is all about kind of choices and opportunity costs and what have you. And as I mentioned before, like we're pressing pause on the personal side, but hopefully the fruit of that will pay off in the years to come.
Yeah, for sure. If you put it down to the numbers per se, like it's about 300K, almost 300K of equity in a year and a bit. And like you said, you've got 3 properties in Australia. It's extremely, you're in a minority there, certainly in the top 20% of investors, and that you've done that within a year, and that's outside your PPR. Well done. Kudos to both of you. Obviously, big shout out to Hayley again. She's been instrumental in a lot of the decisions that we joke the group we've got is Hayley's monopoly, but both of you have done, look, again, extremely well. You've set yourselves up really well, not just for yourselves, but for your children. So it's just a matter of now, sitting back, maintaining the properties as they come. Obviously, there's going to be some maintenance here and there, optimizing your cash flow through tax and all that. But no doubt you'll just sit back and relax and watch it grow.
Yeah, that's the plan.
For sure. No, absolutely. Well done, Hayden and Hayley. Yeah, got a lot of respect for you guys in terms of just the attitude you've had in terms of getting into investment. And you guys show what you can do when you take action. You got many others out there who will chat about it, don't get in, and now they're well behind. Well done on getting to where you are.
Thank you. And as I mentioned before, we wouldn't have got anywhere near where we've got to without kind of your skill set, your outlook, and also a little bit of your humour as well. So genuinely appreciate the partnership, and we say we'll pause at 3, but who knows what the future holds.
Absolutely. And yes, I love the banter on the cricket and the rugby too. So go the Kiwis. Yep. No, thanks again, Hayden, for joining us today. And no doubt our listeners will get a lot out of that. So well done, mate.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys, for joining us today, and we'll see you on the next one.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed the chat, feel free to drop us a rating on Spotify or wherever you listen. It helps us reach more listeners to help them with their journey. Catch you in the next episode.